Today's lab is on basic IPv6 address configuration on router R1, which is shown on the diagram, and also end devices such as computers, laptop, and server, as can be seen from this diagram. The address that you can see that you need to configure for today's lab is shown in this table here, whereby we are going to configure IPv6 global aggregate address, which allow us to communicate to the global internet on gigabit Ethernet interface 00, 01, and serial interface 000. And last but not least, we are also need to configure the link local address, which is FE80::1 on the respective gigabit Ethernet interface to allow local LAN communication. Let's start off by going to router R1 and go into the CLI mode. Go into enable mode, which is followed by a config T. Whenever you are doing any IPv6 address configuration or any configuration that relates to IPv6, take note that the first command that you will always need to configure will be IPv6 unicast routing. This command basically allows unicast packet to be forward out through router's interface to another router. Take note that for later version of iOS, IPv6 unicast routing is already enabled by default, but it is always a good practice to always do IPv6 unicast routing in case for older version of iOS it is not enabled. Let's start off by going to the first interface, which is your gigabit Ethernet interface 00, by doing int g00. So how to do your IPv6 address configuration is very simple. Basically, the command to start out with will be IPv6 followed by the address. It is basically quite similar to your IPv4 address configuration, except for the additional word v6. The address we're going to configure will be 2001:db8:1:1:1, followed by the prefix of 64. Enter, and there you go. You have configured the first IPv6 global aggregate address on the gigabit Ethernet interface 00. Let's go on to further configure the link local address, which will allow us to communicate within the local area network. It is still using the same command, IPv6 address followed by FE80::1. Take note that in order to configure your link local address, you will need to actually end off the command by the link local parameter. That's all you need to do. And the next basically is to enable the interface by doing a no shut. You can see that the interface for G00 is now turning green. Let's double confirm the address that we have configured by doing a do show IPv6 interface brief to double check that the IPv6 address that we have configured is correct. So you can successfully, you can see that for the gigabit Ethernet 00 interface, the link local address is FE80::1, and the global aggregate address is 201:db8:1:1:1. Let's continue the lab by going to gigabit interface G01. Similar to how we have configured for gigabit interface Ethernet 00, we're going to go into int g01 followed by IPv6 address short form followed by the 201:db8:1:2:1/64. You can see that this is a different subnet by taking note that the fourth segment of the IPv6 address now start with 2 instead of the fourth segment that is for gigabit Ethernet interface 00, which is 1. Let's pause a while and take a look at the IPv6 interface brief and see what happens. There is something that I would like to highlight here. Take a look at your gigabit Ethernet interface 01. Before we actually configure the link local address, you can see that once we have configured any global address on any interface, straight away, by default, any interface on the router will actually make use of the EUI64 extension to actually create its own link local address. And in this case, you can see that the gigabit Ethernet interface 01 have a link local address of FE80:201:63FF FE34B602, okay, which is derived from the MAC address of the interface by inserting the FFFE in between the 48 bit of the MAC address. But in terms of simplifying administrating a network, it is often preferable to actually assign a FE80:1 to all the interface for communication within its separate local area network. So in this case, we're going to use IPv6 address FE80:1 followed by the command link local. Let's double confirm the link local address that we have configured on G0/1. Okay. To take note that any interface can be configured with a similar link local address, as because of the fact that a link local address is only communicating within its own local segment. After we have configured the 2 gigabit Ethernet interface, okay, let's continue by doing a no shut on the G01. Let's proceed on to configure the IPv6 address for the respective server and PC. Let's start off with the sales computer. Going to the desktop, IP configuration. You can see that for the sales, we are supposed to configure 2001 DB8:1:1:2 prefix of 64. Okay, and the gateway which we have configured on the Cisco router for gigabit Ethernet interface 00, which is FE80:1. Close it and double confirm that you have successfully configured the IPv6 address on the sales computer by doing the IPv6 config command on the command prompt. Take note that you have successfully configured the address correctly. Proceed on to configure the other two servers, the accounting server and the CAT server, by doing the same configuration under the desktop tab and IP configuration. Okay, FE80:201 DB8:1:1:4 prefix of 64 for your accounting server. Gateway, similarly, we're going to set it as FE80:1. Close it. Double confirm by doing the IPv6 config, which you can see from here. Go on to the CAT server, do the same thing. 2001 DB8:1:2:4 64 prefix FE80:1 for the default gateway, which is the link local address that you configure on the gigabit 01 interface. Let's go back to the sales. How to ensure that your sales computer can reach your accounting server and your CAT server? By going to command prompt, it's very simple. Just by making use of the ping command, you just need to do the ping to the aggregate address that you have configured on the accounting and the CAT server. You can see that we can successfully ping to the accounting server. Let's ping to the CAD server on the other end. You can see that we can also successfully reach the CAT server on the second segment that is connected to the gigabit interface 01 server. We can also make use of the web browser if we have the web features enabled on the server by just typing in the server address. In this case, for accounting server will be 201.db8:1:1:4. You can see that from the name itself, we have basically accessed the accounting server. Let's try out for our CAD server. Basically, this is what we can do for a basic IPv6 address configuration. Other than this, another useful IPv6 address that you must remember is how to test for the IPv6 protocol stack to ensure that the local protocol stack on the computer is working, which is the number of ::1. Take note that ::1 is also equivalent to the IPv4 address of 127.0.0.1, which is the localhost address for us to test out the protocol stack. Other address that you might want to take note of, will be addresses such as FC00 range, which is basically your local link address, which basically correspond to the IPv4 private address range. We also have our FF00 address, which is also known as your multicast address range. So basically, this wraps up the basic IPv6 addressing that we're going to do for today's lab.